The Scientific Research Council is bringing
may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honourable Senate now resumes its sittings, and before we proceed with the day's business, I wish first of all to apologize to our visitors for the late start. We have a number of kids with us today from the Praise Tabernacle Christian Academy. There are 54 students and 2 teachers, and I wish to welcome you to the Senate this morning. I was admiring teachers, I was admiring the students, how well put together they were, young men with their ties and the ladies in the nice skirts. And I think that it is important, an important aspect of the discipline for you to be turned out. So I compliment the teachers on the turnout of your students. Please remember that this is your Senate. Garden House belongs to you as Jamaicans, and you're always welcome to come here to view the Senate and to participate in the democratic process. I'm sorry to keep you all waiting again so long today, because when I came here at 9 o'clock, most of you guys were already here. So we apologize for that, and I hope that notwithstanding the late start, you will enjoy the sitting today. So once again, welcome students and teachers of the Praise Tabernacle Christian Academy. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Ministry papers number 57 to 59 of 2018, entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues, dated April 3, 9, and 23 of 2018. The law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Denham Town Community Zone extension of period of operation number 3 order 2018, and the order resolution 2018. The law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Mount Salem community and environs in the parish of St. James zone, extension of period of operations number 3 order 2018, and the order resolution. Under the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures act 2017. Annual report of the Consumer Affairs Commission for the year 2016-2017. Annual report of the Fair Trading Commission for the year 2012 to 2013 and 2013 to 2014. Annual report on audited financial statements of the Transport Authority for the year 2016 to 2017. And Jamaica Logistics Hub Initiative Market Analysis and Master Plan and Implementation Strategy for the Global Logistic Hub Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is intended today to take the Act to amend the Public Procurement Act, and it is intended to take it through all its stages. Mr. President, the Act before us today, the bill before us today, was tabled in this Honourable House on June 1, 2018. And it is my honour to present its terms to the Senate today. Mr. President, public procurement can and in fact does have a major impact on Jamaica's economy. This is not a matter that should be taken lightly. Government procurement accounts for a substantial part of the global economy at 10 to 20% of GDP globally. In Jamaica's case, public procurement is estimated at an even higher percentage, at 30% of GDP. And this shows how important the issue is to this nation. So we must ensure that the process is a fair and transparent one, a transparent process in the use of taxpayers' money, because this is, in fact, big business, and it is the Jamaican people's business. Mr. President, public procurement can no longer be treated as a routine clerical function within a ministry or department. Today's procurement environment is anything but routine. It requires an understanding of dynamic markets, ever-changing technologies, and modern purchasing methods. Furthermore, in addition to national regulatory requirements, we have to ensure compliance with international obligations in trade, labor, the environment, and in the mitigation of corruption. Further still, Jamaica needs a public procurement regime that embodies the fundamental principles for any regime to be successful, including competition, efficiency, equity, fairness, transparency, and of course, last but certainly not least, value for money. Today, we're taking a big step towards fine-tuning and cementing this regime. Mr. President, you will recall that the Public Procurement Act 2015 was a major achievement and a major step forward in reforming the public procurement regime in Jamaica. That regime seeks to catalyze economic growth, enhance the potential for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to compete for Government of Jamaica contracts, increase the efficiency of government in delivering timely services, as well as increase the public's confidence, and to harmonize documentation and allow for electronic submission of bids. There have, however, been challenges in attaining all of these objectives. The amendments proposed today, together with the regulations, will get us closer to effective implementation of a new procurement regime. 2018. Those have not yet been tabled because they require the Public Procurement Commission under the Act to be operational first. So this Act today has to be passed before those regulations are tabled. But these regulations will address the registration and classification of suppliers, as well as strengthen and expand the functions of the Commission as an independent body. Mr. President, we can all agree as well that changing the public procurement landscape requires proper implementation. In this regard, the government is partnering with the Management Institute for National Development to put in place a sustainable program for capacity strengthening. In fact, 20 public officials are currently being instructed as trainers for the rollout of the public procurement training program across the public sector. Additionally, the Ministry of Finance is far advanced in implementing the electronic procurement platform. To date, 89 procuring entities have been trained in its functionalities, and 29 are already using the platform to execute procurement contracts. Notably, approximately 1,000 suppliers are registered on the platform, and 264 Jamaican suppliers have been trained by the ministry. Turning to the bill itself, Mr. President, the decision to amend the Public Procurement Act 2015 came about as a result of challenges acknowledged or recognized while drafting the supporting regulations, the Public Procurement Manual, and the standard bidding documents. While most of the amendments are to correct language, to clarify, and reference errors, there were one or two policy matters that also had to be revisited. For example, a second look was given to the provisions related to special and differential treatment measures. These are measures which are given special consideration to a class of suppliers and necessarily target a group of suppliers. Internationally, they're used to protect vulnerable groups such as youth, women, MSMEs, and to build special industries through transfer of knowledge, among other things. Mr. President, the changes being proposed to the Act seek to align the current policy on offsets with that of the WTO's concept of special and differential treatment measures, which in fact encapsulates offsets, domestic margins of preference, and set-asides as measures that can be applied in procurement, in public procurement. How they were treated in the bill was actually dissonant with the internationally accepted concept. Mr. President, the bill before us seeks, in sum, to add or revise definitions, to clarify the role of the Office of Public Procurement Policy, to distinguish the approved registered supplier from the approved unregistered supplier, to clarify the responsibility of the heads of a procuring entity regarding its specialist procurement units, to include additional circumstances in which it will be possible to use public procurement methods to increase efficiency of the procurement function, again ensuring that we get best value for money, to make clear distinctions between eligibility, that is, the bidder being required to demonstrate proof of tax compliance and appropriate registration, as opposed to qualification, the bidder in these circumstances showing ability and capacity to fulfill the requirements of the specific procurement opportunity, and importantly, so that the standstill period is applicable to Tier 1 contracts, and that's the category that's most accessible by MSMEs. So this will ensure that MSMEs will now be able to seek review and reconsideration of procurement decisions. Mr. President, I'll move directly to a clause-by-clause review of the bill. Clause 1 addresses all the preliminary issues, and Clause 2 amends Section 2 of the Act by including new definitions as well as revising some existing definitions. In particular, new definitions include terms such as approved registered suppliers, closed framework agreements, special and differential treatment measures, set-asides, domestic margins of preference, domestic content, and eligible bidders. Of note, it was considered important to include a definition for closed framework agreement, as the Act had defined open framework agreement, but not the converse. Similarly, approved registered suppliers was not defined, but approved unregistered suppliers was already defined in the Act. There are amendments to the definitions of bid security and suppliers, international competitive bidding, invitation to bid, national competitive bidding, open bidding, and single source procurement. And as was alluded to earlier, the definition for offsets is being amended as the original definitions covered other special and differential treatment measures as falling under the heading of offsets. For example, original definition identified margin of preference and set-aside as being types of offsets, but this is not how they're treated internationally. Offsets, set-asides, and margins of preference are in fact all subsets of special and differential treatment measures. So that's the more appropriate term, and the amendment is now being made to reconcile how the definitions are treated. In respect of definitions, Mr. President, the final one to note is that the definition of suppliers is being expanded to include all types of suppliers, and the subsets are dealt with accordingly. Mr. President, Clause 3 amends Section 5, Paragraph G of the Principal Act by deleting the words "and approved registered suppliers," as the word suppliers, under the new definition, now captures all categories of suppliers. Importantly also, Section 5I is being amended to insert the word micro, which was inadvertently omitted in the last bill, and one would admit that it's important to ensure that we are in fact recognizing micro, small, medium, and small and medium enterprises in the framework of the bill. Clause 4 amends Section 7.1 of the Act to empower the Office of Public Procurement Policy to review and make recommendations for the establishment of framework agreements for procuring entities and for any modifications which may be necessary. And this is done by inserting a new paragraph N. Additionally, Mr. President, Section 7.1c of the Act is being amended by inserting the words, and I quote, "including the application of special and differential treatment measures." This insertion will allow for the Office to provide for administrative guidance in relation to special and differential treatment measures, some of which would be new to public procurement in Jamaica. Clause 5 of the bill amends Sections 11.1c and 11.1d by replacing the word suppliers with the words approved registered suppliers. Additionally, the Principal Act provided for the establishment of a register of suppliers, classified in tiers according to expertise, but what is actually required is the establishment of a register of approved suppliers, classified in like manner. Clause 5 seeks to correct this by amending Section 11.1e. Clauses 6, 7, and 8, respectively, Mr. President, amend Sections 15, 1A, Section 16, and Section 18.2 by again replacing the word supplier with the words approved registered supplier. These amendments distinguish the supplier who is registered with the Public Procurement Commission and the ones who are not, but are still suppliers of goods and services. It is to be noted that Clause 7 also amends the marginal note at Section 16 of the Act. Mr. President, Clause 9 of the bill amends Section 20 of the Act by deleting the words develop and inserting the words develop and provide to the Office a copy of the approved, so that the paragraph will now read develop and provide to the Office a copy of the approved annual procurement plan for the procurement entity. And this is to make it clear that the Office only requires the procuring entities to provide a copy of their annual procurement plan and not the original. So this is something to allow for the practical efficiency or efficacy rather of the provisions before. Mr. President, Clause 10 amends Section 21.2 of the Act by replacing the words administrative guidance with the words such administration guidance as may be, capturing the discretion of the Office of Public Procurement Policy to issue administrative guidance if it is required to procuring entities in the management of procurement committees. Mr. President, Clause 11 of the bill amends Section 23 by deleting subsection 5, as it was felt that the language therein was contradictory and uncertain, and noting, of course, as well, that the issue of Jamaican bidders was already addressed in Section 31.2. In essence, Mr. President, Section 31 as a whole provides for the protection of bidders who are Jamaican, as well as protection that will be afforded through special and differential treatment measures. So together with the new definition proposed in the bill and the provisions of the regulations, that matter will be properly and more clearly addressed on the passage of this bill. Mr. President, Clause 12 amends Section 24(2)A by substituting the words "as many suppliers as possible" for the words "all known suppliers," so that the section which deals with restrictive bidding is a little more limiting. And that paragraph is being further amended to insert the word "competitively" to make it clear that an invitation would be extended to as many suppliers as possible, but who are capable of supplying competitively the goods, works, or services which may be the subject of the particular procurement opportunity. Clause 13, Mr. President, amends Section 25 of the Act by inserting a new paragraph which provides for another circumstance in which it will be possible to use the single source procurement method. The circumstance would be where the time and cost involved in considering a large number of bids would be disproportionate to the estimated value of the procurement. Section 25 is also being amended by deleting the words "or approved unregistered supplier." So again, this amendment deals with the efficacy of the bill, of the regulations and the Act itself, allowing the process to move in a pragmatic way. Mr. President, Clause 14 seeks to provide some clarity in relation to the management of procurement methods. It therefore further amends Section 25 by including new sections 25A to 25G. Sections 25A to E describe the processes which may be employed under the specific methods of procurement. Section 25F provides that a procuring entity may engage in procurement under an open framework agreement or a closed framework agreement in accordance with prescribed procedures. Notably, at 25B, where a procuring entity engages in procurement by means of open bidding, it may be conducted in a single stage or in 2 stages. Importantly, 25G prohibits the splintering of a single procurement into separate procurements to avoid the threshold requirements or approval limits under the Act. Heads of procurement entities are required to ensure that this does not occur, Mr. President, and this is a serious issue. The splintering of single procurement into separate procurement is now expressly prohibited here. Mr. President, Clause 15 of the bill amends Section 31 of the Act as a result of the amendments to Section 25. So consequential amendments here. Reference to 24(1)B is also being inserted for coherence. Clause 15 also amends the Principal Act by inserting a new Section 31(4), which provides that a procuring entity may apply to a procurement proceeding any special and differential treatment measure as may be prescribed. So this is to ensure, again, that the special treatment that I described earlier, Mr. President, where it may be required to either protect a particular industry or to empower a particular segment of supplier, such as MSMEs or young people or women, that they may be prescribed in the regulations. Mr. President, Clause 16 amends Section 32 of the Act to clarify that the section concerns the eligibility requirements of the suppliers and not qualification. Clause 17 of the bill amends Section 38(2)B of the Act by substituting the more encompassing phrase "applicable special and differential treatment measures" instead of the word "offset." Clause 18 amends 44(4) of the Act by deleting paragraph B, which states that the standstill period is not required for the award of procurement contracts where the price is less than the Tier 1 limit. It was felt, Mr. President, that this provision was unfair to smaller bidders, and this Chamber may recall that the standstill period is a period which is declared after the determination of a successful bid and before the award of the contract. But during this period, bidders are allowed to query the procuring entity's decision and to award a procurement contract. So, Mr. President, this amendment is intended to add the protection that is being given to larger bidders to the smaller bidders as well, consistent with our desire to ensure that MSMEs are in fact empowered under the procurement provisions. Mr. President, Clause 19 amends the heading of Part 6 of the Act by deleting the word "appeal," as the use of the word does not accurately reflect the contents of the provision. And Clause 20 amends Section 51 of the Act by deleting subsection 2, as well as other consequential amendments. Mr. President, and I'll just make the point there that this adjustment was made to make it clear that it's an aggrieved party that has the right to query a decision. Mr. President, Clause 21 amends Section 53 by deleting the reference to Section 51.3. 51.2 was just deleted, as I mentioned, under Clause 20. So now the old reference would be incorrect. And Mr. President, Clause 22 amends Section 61E by replacing the words offset with special and differential treatment measures, again to appropriately use the broader term. Clause 23 amends 61 of the Act by deleting the words or approved unregistered supplier wherever they appear, again as the word supplier already captures the subcategories of suppliers. 61(1)B is also being revised. Mr. President, Clause 24 of the bill outlines a number of consequential amendments and replaces Section 55 with a new Section 55, repealing the National Contracts Commission's Interim Provisions Act 2017, and inserts a new Clause 66 and renumbers, of course, the old 66 as the new 67. Mr. President, the amendment of Section 19B of the Financial Administration and Audit Act is to harmonize the provisions of that section with the new Public Procurement Act. This one was an amendment which was effected by Section 55 of the Principal Act and specified in the 4th schedule of the Act, which has been deleted and replaced by the new Section 65, noted previously. Mr. President, Clause 24 further provides a new Section 66, subsection 2 and 3, which respectively revokes the Financial Administration Supplies Regulations 1963 and the Public Sector Procurement Regulations 2008. These latter two subsections have been moved from the original Section 66, which is now renumbered 67, and do not represent any substantive change to the section. Notably, the Public Sector Procurement Regulations 2008 is also revoked. The Public Procurement Act and the 3 regulations will cover the legislation, will together cover the legislation governing public procurement. Mr. President, Clause 25 of the bill amends Section 66 of the Principal Act, now renumbered as 67, by changing the marginal note, renumbering sections, and changing, of course, the error that is there, the words commended to commenced. Also, Section 67 as renumbered is amended by inserting after subsection 4, paragraph B and C, which references the National Contracts Commission, Interim Provisions Act 2017. Mr. President, Clause 26 of the bill amends the 1st schedule of the Act in paragraph 1A of Part A by deleting the words which are incorrectly stated, donated by the government of Jamaica, and replacing them with the exact opposite, which is the words donated to the government of Jamaica by. The heading of Part B of the 1st schedule is also amended. Clause 27 of the bill, Mr. President, amends paragraph 1, sub 2, subpara C of the 2nd schedule of the Act by inserting after the words Jamaica Bar Association the words or such other association as may represent attorneys at law. And Mr. President, Clause 28 of the bill amends paragraph 8 of the 3rd schedule by deleting the words to act in that behalf and substituting them with the words by the chairman to signify the documents and decisions of the review board. The 2nd amendment in this clause is to paragraph 9.2, Mr. President, by deleting the words and numerals Section 57 and substituting, therefore, Section 51. Mr. President, Clause 29 of the bill repeals the 4th schedule of the Principal Act, which is no longer necessary due to the new Section 66, which provides for the amendment of enactments. Mr. President, as you would have heard, this is quite a technical bill, one which is seeking to correct, clarify, and ensure efficacy, business efficacy, as well as alignment with international standard terminology addressing treatment of public procurement, as well as, of course, ensuring that the matters of special and differential treatment are appropriately provided for and that MSMEs are also effectively recognized. Mr. President, when we get to committee stage, I will also introduce a few minor amendments, mostly editorial, but also in changing the definition of Jamaican, a Jamaican body, under Clause 2, we will insert a clarification to indicate which reads as follows, that it will be a body under paragraph 3 in which more than 50% of the equity interest is under the ultimate effective control of, or ultimate ownership by a Jamaican. So the definition of Jamaican that's being proposed by the Amendment Act is being further amended to ensure that the definition of the body is consistent with the definition under the Companies Act. So again, making the legislative framework more cohesive. And there, Mr. President, I end my clause by clause, and I commend this bill to the members of the Senate for their approval. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Before I recognize Senator Morris, we are joined by 3 members of Equality Youth Jamaica. Where are you guys? Okay. Welcome to the Parliament. You heard me welcome the youngsters earlier. You're always welcome to come and spend some time with us. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. Senator Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I would like to join in welcoming those groups that are present here to the Senate today as well. Mr. President, I stand to give my support to this piece of legislation which seeks to make amendments to the Procurement Act, which, whilst in government, we passed in 2015. And what is taking place today is an effort to strengthen the existing legislation to make sure that it keeps abreast and apace with modern governance framework, and to make sure that we strengthen the mechanisms as it relates to the procurement of goods and services in our country. You know, Mr. President, when the leader of government business spoke, and she mentioned the percentage of the national expenditure that goes to public procurement, I was a bit surprised because I thought it was less than the figure that she had given. But 30% of the national expenditure is indeed significant, because you are talking about over 200 billion Jamaican dollars. And Mr. President, in any economy, that is a significant spend by government. And we have to make sure that the necessary mechanisms are in place so that fairness and equity and transparency takes place in terms of the procurement of goods and services. Because if it is that we are going to stamp out corruption and improve our governance framework, we have to make sure that in securing goods and services for government, there are rules and regulations that are in place to guide the process. And we have to also ensure that if there are rules and regulations, there are sanctions for breaches. And if there are breaches, there must be penalties, and those penalties must be adhered. And I was a bit disappointed that in going through the list of amendments, I never see anything, probably it escaped my eyes, but I never saw anything there as it relates to relating to penalties and so forth for breaches. I know that it is in the principal act, but I was wondering if we would have had a real look at any of those breaches and see how we could improve, strengthen the penalties and so forth that are there for breaches. Because, Mr. President, we have to send a strong signal in government that we are serious at stamping out corruption. Stamping out corruption. And I don't matter who it is. I don't matter who it is. We have to send a clear signal, because every time a corrupt act takes place in government, it robs the little man on the street of a potential benefit. It robs the teachers of possible resources to assist in the classroom or their salary. It robs persons with disabilities of resources that they would need to assist them in their daily lives. And so we have to send a very strong signal where this is concerned. One of the things that I took note of, Minister, is the section dealing with special and differential treatments. And I was wondering if you're going to have a listing of the groups that are likely to benefit from this in either the regulation to come. Because I would like to see it spelled out who are the individuals that are likely to benefit from such an arrangement. And I'll tell you why, Minister, because you know I am not going to stand up in this parliament and make a presentation without batting for my disabled brothers and sisters, right? And the truth is, I like the provision, but I would want to make sure that when we are setting the regulation or so, we spell out who are the individuals that are likely to benefit from such a provision. Take for example, well, let's say sector? Sector, okay, all right. Take for example, Minister of Education, who, you know, we were together on Labor Day throwing sledgehammer in the concrete down by Eltham, down by St. Anne's Bay Primary School. Yes, man, yes, man. No. That ramp was correctly constructed. I can vouch for that. But the fact of the matter is, Minister, the Ministry of Education on an annual basis have a significant spend in terms of public procurement. And one of the things that I note happens every year is the construction of desks and chairs for classrooms. This is something that persons with disabilities, whether through Abilities Foundation or some other entity associated with the disabled sector, could participate in building chairs and desks for schools, creating employment for persons with disabilities. And I would want to suggest that that matter be taken on board in terms of trying to bolster and generate employment for persons with disabilities. So, Mr. President, I believe that this, these amendments seek to strengthen the existing legislation and I don't anticipate any major problems from our side in terms of the legislation. Any suggestions that come from this side are positive suggestions that are designed to strengthen and improve the legislation, because we take our responsibility very serious on this side, and so when we review the legislation, it is within the context of improving and strengthening. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morris, and I listen to you from a seat other than your own.
Can I get
Senator Webby? And you also addressing me from a seat other than your own?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Mr. President. May I address the Senate from a seat other than my own? I'm just waiting on the...
You know, I hate to say it, but there is no reason why one of the stewards should not be at the other end of the Senate.
Thank you very much.
One of the orderlies, you have somebody there. Mr. Marshall, one of the orderlies is to remain there,
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning all. Mr. President, I rise in support of the Public Procurement Amendment Act 2018. As you have heard from our leader, this bill, the Public Procurement Act, and its accompanying regulations will together create a modern system for the government to procure goods and services. Mr. President, I think the leader and Senator Morris articulated it quite well, that the government plays an important role in national development, because in fact, if you look at all the numbers, Senator Brown, you are the single largest purchaser of goods and services in the economy. Public procurement provides many of the services, goods and infrastructure we use daily, speaking about roadworks, medication and equipment in hospitals, and textbook use in the schools. Therefore, the public procurement management greatly influences our country's economy and people's quality of life. Mr. President, I'd like to speak a little bit about the efficiency or the inefficiency or improving efficiency in public procurement. Mr. President, as I think we are all aware that there has been a cycle of inefficiencies in the public procurement, which is, in my opinion, really unsustainable. I think if we look back at an article in the Observer, I think it was in 2014, where it was stated that $60 billion was spent on public procurement, and approximately 2% of that was actually spent on the bidding documents alone. So what we're talking about is $1.2 billion being spent on the bidding documents alone, and that is coming from the Observer from about 2014. So the numbers may have changed slightly, but the point has been made in terms of the amount that we spend on the bidding documents alone. Mr. President, we have also heard of instances where essential equipment malfunctions, for example, in the public health system, and the tedious procurement process significantly delays the time it takes to get a replacement. That is why, in reviewing the bill, Mr. President, one of the key drivers of change towards greater efficiency in procurement is the electronic procurement platform that we are going to be implementing going forward. In fact, Senator Skeffrey, if you look at the World Bank's electronic government procurement draft strategy, this indicated that e-procurement could actually reduce transaction costs anywhere between 50 to 80%, so it's significant. In fact, if you look at South Korea as an example in terms of their e-procurement system, they actually saved $1.4 billion US in cost, and the private sector in that country saved $6.6 billion in costs compared to a previous paper-based system. So we're talking about big money. And listen to this, Mr. President. Under the paper-based system in South Korea, it took about 30 hours to process a transaction. Now that figure is down to 2 hours, from 30 hours to 2 hours because of the electronic platform. I believe, Mr. President, when we pass these bills, and I say it here in the Honourable House all the time, what gets measured gets done. I believe that, and I would suggest, Mr. President, that the Minister of Finance, in terms of those figures that I just articulated, that the Minister of Finance set their own targets for cost reduction so they can save taxpayer dollars, so these savings can be allocated to social services, because this is big money. So I would ask that the Ministry of Finance, having had this bill passed, let us set some targets in terms of how much we can save in this public procurement. The other point that I had raised, and our leader of the House, I was very happy to hear, but the leader in the Senate, the training to use technology. Mr. President, while technology has the ability to transform processes and improve productivity, the human component is most critical in the process of designing and implementing e-procurement programs. If persons are not trained to use technology, the full benefits will definitely not be realized. The Office of Public Procurement Policy is mandated to provide training, and all stakeholders, including MSMEs, will require training. I'm aware that some initiatives are already underway. I would also like to suggest, Mr. President, that a help desk for resolving any issues will be valuable, especially in the early days of system implementation. And this is very simple. You can have a call center. Mr. President, another factor that can positively influence the outcome of reforms to public procurement is change management. And I make the point about change management even on a broader scale when we're having these fundamental change in the public sector. And let me just share with you my own thoughts on change management and my definition. Mr. President, change management is the application of a structured process and set of tools for managing the people side of a system and organizational changes. So it is my opinion, Mr. President, that change management is therefore necessary to achieve the desired outcomes of the public procurement reforms. So therefore, I'm suggesting again that when these changes are made, that we have a structured change management system in place to ensure that implementation will go smoothly. My other point that I want to raise relates to MSMEs. Mr. President, I noted with the approval that the legislative scheme will facilitate the reservation of a portion of government contracts for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. This supports, if you recall, the MSME entrepreneurship policy of 2013. Mr. President, all around the world, and it is the same for Jamaica, the SME is a major engine of growth. Typically, SMEs account for more than 90% of all firms, 60% of employment, and 40 to 60% of output in most economies. Reserving a portion of government contracts for Jamaican suppliers is a good way for the government to lead by example, Buy Jamaican, Build Jamaica. Mr. President, I recall the passion of my friend and former president of the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, Mr. Omar Azan, lobbying for local manufacturers, and he has been doing this for many years, of textbooks where we are being outbid by manufacturers in Trinidad to supply the government textbook program. The Trinidad manufacturers could actually bid at a lower price. I want to say that is my understanding, based on some research that I have done, that based on these contracts that they were getting to print the textbooks in Trinidad and that cash flow attached to those contracts, they were able to actually to retool their printer down there and even put us in a less competitive position. So I want to strongly support and add to the voice of Omar, who has been saying this for many years. Let us try and bring that back to Jamaica. Buy Jamaican, Build Jamaica. Mr. President, and in fact, I understand for some countries there is a threshold that if you are a foreigner and you bid somewhere between 10 to 20% less than the local producer will get the contract. And you know why? Because if you think about an economy, right, of that job creation and that value added in the local economy, it far outweighs a lower cost than the 10 to 20%. And I think that makes sense. So, Mr. President, I have referred to the MSME policy, and it states that there is a proposed minimum set aside of about 20% of government contracts for eligible micro and small businesses. And I know other countries have implemented that. I would like to also suggest, Mr. President, on a graduated basis, that over a period of time, that we increase that 20% to a minimum of 30% going forward. And that's nothing new. If you look at a World Bank article from 2016, where it noted that the U.S. federal government allocates 23% of all federal contracts to American MSMEs. So this is nothing new. So I believe that, again, that we need to be ambitious and set our targets from 20 to 30% over a period of time. Mr. President, before I close, I want to speak about transparency as an indicator of good governance. Mr. President, transparency is an important element in public procurement. Transparency, in my humble opinion, ensures better quality of public services, encourages competition, fair competition, builds public trust, and ultimately secures development outcomes. The Public Procurement Commission is instrumental in change towards a more transparent system of government. My understanding is that the Commission will be in place by year-end, and the Honourable Minister of Finance must be commended for setting the target in light of a delay with the implementation of the legislation for some time now. The Commission will have an oversight function for public procurement, and we will be depending on them to hold procuring entities, suppliers, and other stakeholders accountable for their stewardship of public funds entrusted to them. Mr. President, let me repeat that again. We will be holding them accountable for their stewardship of public funds entrusted to them. Each public contract should have an audit trail that is clear and sufficient to enable a proper evaluation of the procurement process and to assist with the answering of key audit questions. And finally, Mr. President, I want to speak a little bit about the National Action Plan. Mr. President, Jamaica in 2016 signed on as a participant in the Open Government Partnership. I'm sure most of us will remember that. And the Open Government Partnership is a multilateral initiative that aims to secure concrete commitments from government to promote transparency, empower citizens, fight corruption, and harness new technologies to strengthen government. Under this partnership, Jamaica is formulating a national action plan covering the areas I mentioned. Mr. President, I want to use this opportunity to congratulate the Most Honourable Prime Minister for making this commitment, and I am looking forward to the completion of the National Action Plan. As a part of the National Action Plan, Mr. President, I'm calling for a commitment for the routine publication of information related to the formation, award, execution, performance, and completion of public contracts. All information on the contract should be readily available for public scrutiny. This will build trust and improve the credibility of the country and the government. If public procurement is done on time, within budget, and with a high level of transparency and efficiency, we will realize significant improvement in our economy and the quality of life of our people. Mr. President, I thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Webby.
Thank you, sir. And
Senator
can I
Fraser.
speak from a seat? That's not mine.
No.
Thank you, sir.
Of course you can, Senator. Not that we would miss you on the backbench, that bright frock.
Mr. President, I stand to make my very brief contribution to this act entitled an Act to Amend the Public Procurement Act. Mr. President, let me state, as stated by our leader, our Bushel, that we on this side have no serious opposition to the bill. In fact, I'll go a step further to say that we do support this bill. As Minister mentioned, in 2015, the Procurement Act was passed, and the intent at the time was to improve efficiency and transparency. In fact, I recall being a member of that Joint Select Committee that deliberated on the bill, and I remember the hours and the weekends we spent trying to get the bill passed. And what was very clear was that on both sides of the aisle, all the members of Parliament were intent on giving their full support and making sure that we have a bill, we have a law that really supports transparency and openness in our procurement process. And it is in that light that I wish to find out, Minister, where we are in 2018. The Act was assented to in October of 2015. And the truth is that we really have not heard much about it. So I would like to know, in view of these amendments, some of which are to be on par with international best standards, but in view of the amendments that are being proposed today, what have we accomplished? How have we fared in terms of transparency and accountability in our procurement process? And I would also like to know whether or not anyone, the extent to which the Act is being utilized, and whether or not anyone has been found guilty of any breach that is found in the Parent Act. And I ask that because the truth is that recent occurrences runs contrary to the intent for which a Procurement Act was passed. And I believe that it makes no sense that as legislators we play lip service to an act and we laud all the credibility and all the possibilities, but at the point of implementation, nothing is done. And I would like to know whether or not, as a country, we're really serious about ridding corruption. And if we're not, then legislation such as this absolutely makes no sense. And it's a waste of time, really, certainly my time, to come here and pass a piece of legislation that we're not prepared to adhere to. And so I am hopeful, Minister, that you are able to advise us as to what we have accomplished in the last 3 years since the passage, 2.5 years since the passage of the Procurement Act. Having said that, I am particularly pleased that this piece of legislation seeks to provide further and better particulars and perhaps give greater treatment to local and domestic companies or Jamaican companies, Jamaican entities. In the bill, we did not go into the kind of detail in terms of Jamaican or foreign. And with the differential treatment that is stated here, I am hopeful that more will be done for our local entities. I don't need to repeat what was said by Senator Floyd or Senator Webley. But indeed, if we are really serious about transforming our country and transforming the economy, and in light of the fact that 30% of our budget goes towards procurement, then we have to ensure that our local bodies, our local entities, our local companies are indeed the beneficiary. This will require more than just a preferential treatment. It also requires, and I'm not anticipating it to be dealt with in this law, but it also requires that more will have to be done by the government to ensure that small and medium-sized enterprises are equipped, are resourced, so that they can be competitive and that they can benefit from these, that they can bid successfully. At the same time, whereas the government has a duty to provide assistance, private entities also have a duty to make sure that they themselves are equipped so that they can be competitive. And what is required, therefore, is a continuation of the dialogue that started in prior to 2016 with our private entities, with governments, and I think to some extent it has continued, to ensure that both stakeholders understand and appreciate what is required, and that they are so empowered in a way that they can take advantage of the provisions that are stipulated here in terms of differential treatment. Mr. President, one of the things that I would like to speak to is the issue of bid, and it follows closely when we talk about the differential treatment. Some time ago, I was in a meeting with some business persons, and one of the gentlemen remarked to me that he is a successful businessman today because 30 years ago, when he bid for a project, he wasn't able to get the project on his own, but a foreign company got the project, but a stipulation was that the foreign company had to have a Jamaican counterpart. And in doing that, there was a transfer of knowledge. He was able to learn, he was able to equip himself with the best technology at the time. And after the completion of that project, he was able to go and expand his business. And so I am hoping that when we come to the regulations, Minister, that these are some of the things that we can talk about, making it mandatory. Certainly that for some industries, that where a foreign company is the successful bidder, or in order for them to be considered, there has to be a local counterpart. Because at the end of the day, it does not benefit the country for a foreign company to come in, benefit from our funds, leave the country at the end of the project, and there is no transfer of knowledge. So that is something that I really look forward to when it comes on to the debate on the regulations. Mr. President, I am generally satisfied with this bill, and I actually have no reservations at all. I, however, want to look at some of the things that has been happening recently. And I wonder, Minister, the Act provides that there is that it ought to go to a committee for review in 3 years, and we're embarking on the 3 years in October. And as we consider that, I want us to consider, I know that generally procurement does not affect or doesn't impact directly issues of employment. And I know that when one looks, for example, at the books, the procurement guideline books, that they do not include employment, and it's very limited in how it treats with consultancy. But I'm hoping that as we consider this move towards the mandated review, that is something that we have got to look at. Because occurrences in recent times does not give me any comfort that we are at a point where we can, in a very open and honest and transparent way, truly recruit persons. And when we look what has been happening in recent times, we notice that some of the persons that have been recruited for skills that they have are skills that already exist in entities, skills that exist in the companies. And in my mind, when we're talking about procurement of any services at all, then these are some of the things that must be considered, and they must be considered when it comes on to procuring a service, a human resource service, i.e. for consultants or otherwise. And so I commend it to you as something to consider, and the technical persons are here, something to consider as we get ready to form that joint select committee to review the bill at the 3-year mark. Mr. President, I have had to work with the Ministry of Finance, and particularly the department or the unit that deals with procurement. And there is no doubt in my mind that the persons with whom I have interfaced are extremely knowledgeable. The challenge I have, though, is that I am not so convinced that the persons who have to deal with procurement outside of that grouping at the Ministry of Finance are equally knowledgeable. And so one of the things that I would love to see happening in light of the amendments, in light of the fact that it is still a relatively new act, that there is greater training of our practitioners. I do not believe that we are fully aware of what is required of us under the Procurement Act of 2015, and certainly these amendments which are being debated here today. And so, in closing, I ask that as we seek to achieve efficiency, we seek to achieve transparency, we seek to achieve more government savings, that we also understand the importance of training our procurement practitioners so that they are aware of the rules and the provisions and the requirement in the Act. I also ask that there be training or public education for those who have to interface with the procurement system, because there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises who simply still do not understand what is required of them. I look forward to the regulations, because it will give in detail the different categories and what is required. And once that is done, then more public education have to be done to ensure that all participants, all stakeholders are brought on board and that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. With that said, Mr. President, I look forward to the Minister sharing with me the lessons that we have learned, the savings that we have been able to accomplish, and just generally how, in the last 2.5 years, the Procurement Act has worked. With that said, Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Hill, I see you're addressing me from a seat of your own.
Mr. President, I'm so pleased that you're in such a wonderfully pleasant and accommodating mood today, as you always have been every Friday that we get here, Mr. President. You were interrupting me there a minute. Mr. President, naturally, I rise to support this bill. I've been watching it for years, go through a number of iterations, and I want to say to Senator Binns, Fraser-Binns, there are one or two things that I support what you say on, but one of them is not the fact as to ask the leader of the House to give, the leader of the Senate, sorry, to give an account of how the bill has been working, because it's not yet operational, and that's why we're trying to get it there. It's been there to be done, but it has not yet. It's not yet operational. That aside, though, Mr. President, I am just very pleased that this act has come at this time. And as any good law should, Mr. President, these proposed amendments to the Public Procurement Act are crafted to help procuring Government of Jamaica entities act in a fair and equitable manner towards Jamaican persons and firms and overseas entities in a transparent and predictable manner, using an even, disclosed, and knowable to all playing field. Not something that is hidden in somebody's back pocket or briefcase and nobody knows what it says. Mr. President, these amendments are also to encourage, and this is vital, to encourage, to assist to make clear to young and new entrepreneurs. Mr. President, people are calling me when I'm using my phone to speak. That's not proper. This is to encourage new entrepreneurs or entrants to GOJ government procurement business that they are welcomed. We need to welcome new entrepreneurs, new entrants, even if they're not young, to bid for government business. Firms in the SME sectors can now compete with big firms on an even playing field, and the money government spends will have a better chance of being spread more widely across the economy and not concentrated among a few big or favored businesses or influential persons. In other words, Mr. President, the issue and the risk of what we despise, the corruption that tends to happen around procurement, these amendments to this act are done over a number of years now to make sure that we wipe out, reduce significantly. Let me just use the term reduce, because some smart person somewhere is always going to find a new corrupt way to do something once you wipe out the old corrupt practices. We must be vigilant, but these amendments allow us to practice that vigilance and in a public manner. Mr. President, I fully expect this wider spread of government procurement money among small and medium-sized enterprises will not only create more compensation among companies for government procurement spending money and thus drive down prices and push up efficiency, but from where I sit at the Economic Growth Council, Mr. President, I'm pleased that most importantly, these amendments will foster and drive an increase in broader economic growth and job creation. In other words, for new jobs, for people can get more work, not just a few people get richer out of government procurement business. And I know my colleague was one of those few that will get a lot of money. Mr. President, we do that too in places. Mr. President, I want to relate, Senator Webby brought up the issue of school books, textbooks being printed. I have a personal example. When I used to write for that newspaper that Senator Brown loves so much on a consistent basis on a Friday rather than coming here, since you asked, Mr. President, it is that really well-established newspaper established in 1834 called the Gleaner. It's a new love? Oh, you've noticed, Mr. President. I'm glad you noticed. Yes, with placards, I mean, Mr. But we won't go there today. We won't go there today. That's right. What we're saying, though, is when I was writing on a regular basis for the Gleaner, I looked into the procurement of textbooks. And Minister Thwaites then was a minister, MP Ronnie Thwaites. And to his credit, in 2015, I got pretty much all the printers in Jamaica. He accommodated us to a meeting, and he was welcoming. And I made the case to him then that printers need a 5-year contract. First of all, people in a certain country up north they get the contract. They take it to another CARICOM country, which we won't name because we're friends and neighbors, and they bid for it in Jamaica. What do you say? Sorry. So they bring it to Jamaica, they win the contract, and our Jamaican printers no get nothing. So I walked in there, Minister Thwaites was, as I said, accommodating, and I said, as a banker, you have to do a couple of things. You have to give them a 5-year contract so that they can go out and buy equipment that is modern, pay people who are good at this business, so that they can compete and win the contracts to print textbooks as long as printing textbooks remain. I'm not sure how long that will last. To his credit, Mr. Thwaites said, yes, I will give them the 5-year contract. And this is now where I want to agree with Senator Binns, and where I keep pushing not only that those of us on the government side, like the Minister of Education then was an enabler, the Economic Growth Council an enabler, NEPA an enabler on one side, but the private sector implementers must step up. The door was open, in my view, Mr. President, and they did not do the stepping that they should have upstepped. And so we need to see that when we put this procurement bill in place and it passes into law, it is an encouragement for entrepreneurs, it's an encouragement for businesses to bid for the money that the government of Jamaica must rightly spend, and we prefer that it be spent among Jamaican entrepreneurs and businesses. But businesses, just like I push enablers, everywhere I go, Montego Bay yesterday and everywhere before that, I push government enablers to enable businesses to do what they must do. When government enablers enable you, like we're doing with this wonderful set of amendments to this act, please step up business and take the business that is being offered from taxpayers' money and do it competitively. So I'm encouraging both sides. The government enablers, those of us in local government, the Minister of Finance has done a tremendous job. I've been working, I want to pick out some of the people I see here. I know Cecile and her boss from the Ministry of Finance. No, I'm not giving them a carte blanche to say they're excellent at all times. I'm just telling you, on this particular bill, I know they've been very good. I've been working with them, and they've done a very good job at it. So I want to compliment them. The work that is done there must now be taken up by businessmen. I see young Senator Crawford is right there taking up his business. We need young entrepreneurs. Young people from the university who are doing engineering must say, this procurement bill now, I can compete with whoever is out there because it's no hiding again. Everybody can step forward. I hope in time, Mr. President, some of it is being done now. I hope in time every single government contract that is awarded is published on a dashboard that anybody can see who get it, who bid for it, and what they're doing, and track it. That's where e-government, I think, is taking us, and we want to get there fast so that there's no funny stuff going on with the taxpayers' money and we can't know. It is that, for those reasons, Mr. President, I'm so pleased that these amendments have come at this time. It's very clear that these are prepared to be provide economic stimulus in this economy, to make sure we enhance the potential of local industries to grow, to make sure that we monitor, the governance is put in place to properly monitor what must be done. And it's not going to be finished. Another few years from now, the world is moving so fast, we might be back here to make some more amendments. That would not necessarily be bad, but it must now get through so that we can get something that's been doing for 2015, for God's sake. Why are we taking so long to pass this, Mr. President? I hope today that as we get through this and as we discuss this, we can unleash this piece of legislation to make it useful to our entrepreneurs and our businesses to go out and do business and grow the economy in fact, Mr. President, to make sure we have both progress and prosperity through this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hill. Senator Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. President. I got to check you for the funding check, you know. Need some funding from over that side. Yeah, for the vice presidential race. So, President, I'm going to try and speak from a seat that is my own. Not going to follow those people over that side. But a lot of times we discuss what, and we don't delay ourselves to discuss why. I have not been studying the scripture as I should, but I think why is God's question. It's the most basic question. In a child consistently asks why. And when we speak to government spending, the reason we encourage government spending is because it has always been identified as one of the three areas to promote growth or to induce economic activity. However, by itself, it is not sufficient. In fact, government spending or any other spending that has high leakage will often not achieve the role that it was intended to achieve. A long time ago, I heard in university that leakage, I think, was multiplier effect was 1/1 minus the leakage. The higher the leakage, the lower the multiplier effect. And so, what I would love to see in the future, that I've not seen now, is that one, there's a greater effort to encourage certain actions within government interaction or government contracts. For example, if a man has contract workers in the main, government should seek not to encourage that by giving him certain contracts. It's unfortunate that government also participates so extensively in contract work. But let's look at security, for example. A person who seeks to have his security forces not treated worse than the dogs that they manage will find it difficult to be a cheaper offering than the person who seeks to cut costs through cutting wages. Government should seek to ensure that that isn't encouraged in its effort. Government should also seek to encourage rural participation. Now, why is it that for small things like, for example, catering, someone from Kingston is catering an event in St. Mary, in St. Elizabeth, in Portman? Why is it that small things like that, proximity to space, cannot be considered to encourage certain rural entities to participate? Especially because government would also not want leakage, internal leakage. Because if leakage happens from St. Elizabeth to Kingston, then migration will also happen from St. Elizabeth to Kingston. And then we start to say we have a squatting problem in Kingston. So therefore, we want for the procurement to encourage that. Now, while I was thinking about it, I realized that we also must find an equilibrium, because you might say you want procurement to encourage businesses with single parents, but then the next thing you know, you start to encourage divorces so that people can become single parents. There is an equilibrium that one has to find as to the type of country you want and what you encourage with profits. Now, the number one lesson I've learned between the difference from seeking wages and seeking profit is risk associated. Seeking wages have less risk than seeking profit. And knowledge and risk have been proven to be inversely related, meaning that the higher the level of knowledge, the lower the level of risk. That's why we don't want to go down a dark street. It's just that we don't have enough knowledge. The same street with a street light, and we go down that street because we have more information, we have more knowledge. So what I'd love to see is that there is a central repository of years of procurement so that a business person can have knowledge of where is the likely investment. For example, everybody know my business, I'm in eggs. I'd love to see all the government entities that have procured eggs. What's the amount of eggs? What's the egg products that they've suppose they did mayonnaise? If I see that the Ministry of Education did mayonnaise for the last 10 years, 15K, then I might invest in a mayonnaise machine. But I'm not going to invest in a mayonnaise machine without the knowledge. And then it's 3 weeks for me to bid on mayonnaise. I don't have a machine. Now, if I was able to go in a central repository and say, okay, this is an area that they have procured, this is the amount, this is the price that they have paid, then I can say, oh, listen, I can go into this business and I can go and try to do that. Senator Webby spoke to certain rules like in the United States, to say 15 to 20%, the local man will get it. Now, we have to remember, first of all, that government don't have the money. Government really manage money for people. It's our money and government manage it. So government shouldn't encourage inefficiency on the part of an entrepreneur. So therefore, anybody who is getting that blight, 10 to 15%, should be willing to open himself to an audit, to an efficiency audit, to say that it is your inefficiencies. And I can tell you, in my first year of business, I have found almost 8 million that just by mistakes we have lost. Now, that shouldn't be something encouraged because it's paid for by government. So therefore, a man who says, okay, I am incapable to compete with the corn prices in America. That's an incompetence. I cannot do that. However, if I waste corn, that efficiency audit should show that. And there should be a pool of funds to then allow me to borrow to become efficient. So if I have a bad machine, there should be a pool of funds to make me get a better machine. But you can't, in perpetuity, pay me more for things that I could change. And so therefore, or do better. And so therefore, I start to buy a vehicle for myself out of the business and pay for the gas out of the business because government is willing to pay an additional 20%. So those areas, for example, that you're incapable to compete, fine, but open yourself to a efficiency audit. Our procurement also must be exposed to equal playing field. Sir President, when the Chinese, for example, can carry in things without paying duty for one project and then transfer it to another project, that's not an equal playing field. Now, at the point that you transfer to another project, you should pay those duties. Because the person who you're competing with is paying duties on those things coming in. So therefore, an equal playing field, there will be things like the China Harbor coming in for that project and him pay no duty for that project, fine. But when you want to meddle into other things, pay the duty and let us be on the same playing field. If we're not on the same playing field, then you're joking about Jamaicans getting into the procurement. The other thing is the services we have to look at in great detail. When I was in the Ministry of Tourism, and there's a whole heap of conversation about the Ministry of Tourism now, there was...
Any procurement issue?
Not at our time. No, well, I don't... I don't hear those comments. You know, Mr. President, there's a lie that has been told that I was paid for by Jamaica to go to England, and that's not true. I just never bothered to answer. I actually went to present a paper, but you see, a lot of people over there have never presented a paper. They don't know about being paid for knowledge. So I was invited by Barbados to present a paper. And I did shell it down. That's the truth. My uncle said I should always tell the truth. The problem is, no. Every time I go foreign, these people invite me based on what I know. So let me tell you some of what I know. I want to say to you, Mr. President, let us disturb me now and just get in my tea. You understand? Sure. But let me tell you some of what I know, Mr. President. We have to ensure that we have, I don't remember what I'm going to tell you, Mr. President. This man just, yes, in the Ministry of Tourism. We did a research, a simple research about tourism linkages. And that research came from someone in Britain. The methodologies were clear. The data was available. Yet we decided that the expertise had to come from over Britain. We could have done that research, UE, UTech, UCC, NCU. Any one of my students, master's students, could have done that research to say that a hotel with 100 rooms use 600 eggs. That wasn't necessary. There's certain efforts that should be reserved once it is able. And the second experience I had, Mr. President, was when we wanted to do a website. And the only bid for the website for entertainment registry came from a Canadian company. The only bid came from a Canadian company. And that wasn't because nobody else was capable. But when I asked other people what happened, we didn't know. There needs to be greater access to the informations of calls. Most time it is in the newspaper somewhere. Nobody don't buy newspaper anymore. There needs to be maybe a registry where persons can say, I'm interested in this information. And this information come to my phone. This information go to social media. That interesting bidders should be able to say once a bid come out, it come directly to an interested bidder. Because all these people that go and train in computer science and things at UWI, none made a bid other than a Canadian company. So therefore, we have always been talking about new ways to communicate. We have to now look at new ways to equally inform. So in encouraging these things, I think the future bill could have designate some areas of encouragement, like less contract workers, health care for workers, reasonable pay, union representation, if that is something you want to encourage. Each government would have decided what they want to encourage. To discourage some action, to create higher efficiency, and not just to remunerate inefficiency, to create an equal playing field, and to give greater information so that persons in business can perceive less risk and greater likelihood to succeed. I think if the bill should have that in the future, it would encourage greater participation of the Jamaican entrepreneur. Thank you, Mr. President.
Just coincidence. Coincidence. Senator Scurfy, you said nothing about a family affair. I recognize. You're recognized, Mr. Senator. President, it is only coincidence that I am speaking immediately after Senator Crawford, but it's still a pleasure. Mr. President, the amendment I have no difficulty with. It turns out that the difficulty I had was with the principal bill that was passed in 2015. That is not being debated today. But the concerns for procurement, as I understand it, is that you wish to reduce, subdue corruption, enhance transparency, create a level playing field. But at the same time, on the other hand, you would wish to generate efficiency and timeliness. And the parent bill and and this present bill they're both doing a lot for the purposes of subduing corruption, promoting transparency, and so forth, Mr. President, and I do congratulate that. But I am not satisfied that our efforts are doing as well on the other side, where we are trying to do things in a timely manner and have it done in certain time frame. My understanding that if you have a project, say, that is valued at $1 billion, and although the billion, there's a time when I was growing up that $1 billion wasn't even mentioned. That is how unusual it was to talk about $1 billion. But $1 billion now for a project is not unusual anymore. And that is the type of project that would be in Category 1 and would have to end up at Cabinet for approval and so forth. It appears to me that from the time of advertising it in the newspaper to say you're going to do this piece of road or you're going to build this particular building, etc.,
to the time when the contract is approved finally and awarded and signed off is at least 1 year. And I am advised that that is with some effort to ensure that it goes through. If it goes through its normal course, it could be a problem. There is a certain amount of bureaucracy and so on. And I know, as one person mentioned, Senator Brown mentioned, sort of Oshe, I am learning this in a direct way, so that we do have systems in place to suppress dishonesty and to suppress inequalities and so forth. And I applaud that, and that's very important. But at the same time, what can I do to ensure that I could reduce this 1 year wait or 2 years wait to 6 months? Is it possible? Is it possible? And that is part of the question, that when we go to look at the regulations and so on, we should take into account. I heard Senator Floyd Morris mention the question of, is it Senator Fraser Binns, criminalizing certain conduct. I am not personally, and I'm speaking personally, in favor of criminalizing certain conducts for procurement, because I am all in favor of administrative penalties. And you see, the procurement, when you read the procurement legislation, you know, so it doesn't have much involvement in it for politicians. The involvement, the decision makings are all servants of the state, not politicians. It is the heads of departments and so on who make the decisions. At the same time, if you criminalize mistakes, what you will do is that the government is the only place you are not able, in Jamaica, that you cannot make a mistake. You go to prison for a mistake. But in addition to that, the potential that your mistake may send you to the general penitentiary has a chilling effect, if not a crippling effect. Yes, mistake, negligence, and so on should be penalized by administrative action, surcharging, etc. Dismissal sometimes, demotion. But to go to the extent that you go to prison, I have a little difficulty, and I hesitate with that. Yes? That's what I interpret my colleague. Yes, well, you know what I mean, I'm an interpreter. But I do not think, because you see, what it does, it stifles innovation and effort. So we have to be very careful how we are pressing for criminalizing of some of the, if you fail to follow certain procedures and so on. I know it's popular, and I know that this is not going to be what I'm saying very popular, but I think that we have to bear that in mind. And I come to some other issues, two issues that I want to touch on that will affect efficiency. So we have now, over many years, over the last 20 years or so, established our NCC, and we have established our sector committees, and we have our contractor registration. And you have levels. It is only if you are at the top level that you are entitled to carry out and to be awarded certain contracts. So it doesn't matter my own personal efficiency, because I don't have the experience in road building. Even if I have certain things and so on, I've never done it and so forth, it is not likely that I will get a contract at a tier 1 level. But what is the story, Mr. President, is that the tier 1 level, there are a limited amount of contractors. There are a finite amount, Mr. President. Very limited. Mr. President, a finite amount. If it is that you are trying as the government to spend $60 billion annually or so for capital works, think about if you have 20 or 30 grade 1 contractors that can do work for $1 billion or more. What it means, Mr. President, is that the contracts would have to go around basically in a circle among the same persons. And that is good. It makes us wealthy, those of us who are there, and even more wealthy. But it also affects efficiency. It means, Mr. President, that you as a grade 1 contractor, Brigham Construction, and by the way, there's no Brigham Construction.
Owned by you.
Owned by me, yes, 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 yes. I wish I were, I mean, you know. But what Brigham Construction does is that Brigham Construction bids for the contracts. He doesn't have the capacity because he has a contract in Montego Bay, he has one in Kingston, he has one in Westmoreland, and he still bids for another one in St. Mary. And so as a result of that, Mr. President, there is a problem. So one of the things I would like to be considered when these new regulations are developed is how can we encourage greater input and movement among the grades, and how can we encourage additional persons to get on board so that we can have a wider pool of experience for the contracting of the larger contracts. To me, it is a great problem at this time. So I put that on the table, and I don't quite know the answer to the question, but I do know it needs to be addressed. The second point is that I am not sure that if Brigham Construction gets on Tier 1, is registered as a Grade 1 contractor, but every time Brigham Construction carries out a piece of work, it is 6 months late, it is $500 million in excess and overrun, but Brigham continues to be a Grade 1 contractor, and Brigham is still entitled to bid and still win. And when he wins, the procurement entity says, oh God, Brigham, again, we are going to be 6 months out of time and we are going to be out of pocket, but there doesn't appear to be much that can be done. That has to be... What I'm saying to you, Mr. President, that these are some issues as we formulate and as the regulations are taken into account. One, we need to encourage the registration of more persons who are capable of doing the work so that it can be more efficient and it can move more quickly. Mr. President, we have to deal with that. And secondly, if I don't perform, I should not be permitted without penalty to carry on being parading and masquerading as a Grade 1 contractor when I am known throughout the industry for inefficiency. And I will end, Mr. President. Why are you saying amen already?
Amen, amen.
Oh, she agreed that I'm going to finish. I don't understand. Mr. President, in the Principal Act, we have a system of appeal. And again, I am struck by it. And as I said, that's not before you today. But when you look at that system of appeals, you'll see that it is done, as I understand it, in a standstill period and so on. And there's an appeal to the procuring entity, which I have no difficulty with. That is right. But there's also an appeal to an external body. I wonder what is the time period now will be added to the implementation of contracts when these appeal processes will have to be done. And then, when you appeal, and you appeal to the commission that Brigham chairs, your appeal, let me put it the other way, a commission. Briam is the appellant. Briam appeal is dismissed. Briam doesn't say, all right, you have some distinguished people on the panel and so forth. Briam says that the commission is wrong. Or maybe some other worse things. So I decided to go to court to challenge the commission in judicial review, get a stay of the decision. So a contract that already took a year or 2 years to reach the stage, for it to go through the appeal process, plus my judicial review process, and somebody else mentioned somewhere else, but let's say just to the High Court, that's another 2 years, if you're lucky. So on the face of it, this extensive appeal process is attractive. But is it going to be in the long run beneficial? Or could we have a situation where the process continues, the contract is awarded, but the aggrieved contractor may be compensated then? I think that these are some of the things that we have to take into account. Do we stop the work? Or is it better that at the end of the day, if it was badly done and you were maltreated or mistreated, that you are compensated financially so that government does not grind to a halt in the interim? So it is on the other side of the balance I am concerned about. I don't think that as a country we have paid sufficient attention to the balance. What we are doing many times is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We are simply saying we are suppressing corruption and to hell with everything else. And I think that's a mistake. It's a mistake. And I'm urging us to pay a little bit more time and attention to the other side, because I always knew, and even when I had a temporary stint as the Attorney General. Is that so? I see. I'm not going down there. Short stint, thank you. And I mentioned the Attorney General's department, a great place. And I was privileged to be there for a short time. It means that because of that, I was well loved. Because of the short time. But the Attorney General's department is the department that gives advice. It gives legal advice. And it represents and so on. But let's take it is advising on a government contract or whatever it is. So you could look at it as a strictly paper and strictly theoretical. But each piece of paper that passed through the Attorney General's department actually represents a life. Because when the department reviews and approves or whatever and it goes through, it means that a project goes through and that boy on the Walton Park Road gets a better school, or his mother gets a job in some place in some government agency, or his father or his brother works on a government project. So what I'm saying is, procurement at the end of the day is not an end in itself. It is not just there to carry through, but when it is done well, efficiently, it brings benefit to people who don't even know that there is a department dealing with the Attorney General's department or any other department. It brings benefit to the people. So I would ask us in the next dispensation that we spend some more time on the efficiencies, cutting time frames, moving, getting more people being ready to do government contracts, to do it on time, and so that we as a people can better ourselves economically and otherwise. I support the amendments, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Bram. Senator Brown.
Mr. President, It appeared to me that in respect to this bill to amend the Procurement Act, that there's a certain degree of unanimity on many issues. It's far from me to speak and not have some deviation from the unanimity that has existed so far. Let me say, Senator Braham, all that you have said resonates with me. I sat as a member of the board that you chair now. I recall, for example, Mr. President, a tender went out for tiles to fix a vacant floor so that we could rent the floor and earn money for the state and offset the expenses of the organization. People bid, but one of the persons who bid was not categorized as part of the construction. Was a hardware, but not part of the construction industry. The person had the tiles, but that bid had to be excluded. We had to send to Italy to get the tiles that was already in Jamaica. That type of inefficiency is what some of the procurement rules lead to. Good is the intent, but we know that the road to hell has been paved with a lot of good intention. And as I listened to the senator, I wondered how much of the people who have been practically involved in the procurement process have influenced the legislations over time. Because that's the key. How does this advance efficiency? We have seen cases where Senator Crawford raised it. There's a project for small contractors in St. Mary. The winner of the bid comes from St. Clarendon, from Clarendon. And you ask yourself, how can this person from Clarendon supply to St. Mary's cement cheaper than the people in St. Mary or even Kingston or St. Catherine? But there are tricks and trades in the business of procurement. And I don't think the country has gotten the full benefit from the procurement rules. Mr. President, there was a leader of this country who, in opposition, used to campaign on the basis that those who breach procurement rules must wear short pants. I think Senator Bryan became the Attorney General to that leader, Mr. Bruce Golding. To Mr. Bruce Golding, who argued that those who breach the procurement rules should wear short pants. In other words, they should go to prison. During his tenure, I don't recall anybody going to prison for breaching the procurement rules. And it tells us that a lot of people talk one thing in opposition, but when they get the chance to implement it, they fail. Mr. President, 3 years ago, 3 years ago, in October, the procurement bill was passed into law, signed by my good friend Senator Floyd Morris as president. And you may get the chance to sign this one, the amendments. Tom, going to come back? But point I'm making The Governor General gave his assent on the 5th day of October 2015. Almost 3 years now, 2.5 years. Why has the bill not been implemented? Why has the act not been implemented in this time? Why has it not been implemented in the 2.5 years? Why has there been no action? See, Mr. President, I am deeply concerned about corruption in the affairs of our country. It has been around for a long time. One of the regulations we're going to be repealing today is the Financial Administration Supplies Regulation of 1963. Despite that regulation, Mr. President, from 63, an entire school was supposed to have been built, but was never built, and the resources allocated for building that school was reported as being used. A commission of inquiry was set up, and the Honourable Atterbert, as he was, refused to attend the commission of inquiry, preferred to pay a fine, a minuscule fine, rather than protect his reputation. Jamaica never got that school. The procurement rules was to prevent things like that. The corruption. Procurement rules was there to prevent people defrauding the farm workers' money. And we know, despite the rules of 63, that a former minister was sent to prison for defrauded farm workers' money. We have established since the 80s, Mr. President, the Office of the Contractor General to monitor the procurement activities of government. I have had the good fortune of reading his book, the book of the first Contractor General, Mr. Ashton Wright. And I'd commend to others. I read up that publication, No Trophies Gained, because it tells us who pays lip service to the anti-corruption fight and the protection of taxpayers' money. Mr. President, I'm concerned that the Office of the Contractor General, who was in the past insists on timely reports and timely activities, that the last annual report to the Parliament was 2015. I'm concerned that we are being shortchanged as a Parliament when a Commission of Parliament has failed to provide us with the 2016 report. I'm talking the Office of Contractor General, and the failure in the middle of 2018 to provide us with the 2017 annual report. This is not like the Contractor General, and I'm wondering what is happening. Why the silence? Why the inefficiency has crept in since, is it since February 2016? I don't know why. But we need some explanation as a Parliament why we're not getting the annual report from the Contractor General for 2016, 2017. Contractor General in the 2015 report said that procurement issue was about $37 billion, Senator Webby, that they had managed, and he was concerned about overrun and waste. I hope we will get those 2 reports that are outstanding from the Contractor General. But I also, Mr. President, seek to get from the Contractor General another report which was promised from June last year. And that report, as the Gleaner carried on June 10th, 2017, Minister questioned in OCG probe of rooms on the beach sale. The OCG promised the report to be soon. And I want to know how comes 1 year after that report of the sale by the UDC of government property, taxpayers' property, that the country cannot be told if we got value for money. If the valuation reports are what we were paid, or we were paid less. It's important, Mr. President, that the Contractor General quickly provide to this Parliament the report on the UDC sale of the rooms property in Ocherios. We were promised from June last year. Senator Webby, you said if we don't measure it, don't get done. We must measure. 1 year is too long. At a time, Mr. President, when corruption is on the increase in the country, we're seeing, Mr. President, that people from whom the Contractor General report as breaching procurement rules have now been fired by the board for breaching procurement rules, have now turned up in the report from Senator Reid last week as consultant in the government. And I point to consultant in the Ministry of Local Government, fired in 2011 for breaching procurement rules. But that person is now employed as a consultant to the government of Jamaica. And I ask, how comes? How comes if we're serious about the procurement rules? I put that on the table. Mr. President, I want to know if this new amendments, which remove some of the national issues, national bids, national suppliers, and to bend it to meet the international. Maybe like the vote on Israel and the vote against Venezuela, we should follow Mr. Trump. Put Jamaica first. Put Jamaica and Jamaicans first. Let us be clear enough, Mr. President. For many years, I've been hearing all small businesses to get a break. Jamaican manufacturers is to get preferential treatment. Go back to Mr. P.J. Patterson time as Prime Minister. We have been hearing that. Go back to Mr. Bruce Golding time as Prime Minister. Go to Mrs. Simpson Miller as Prime Minister. I've been hearing for too long. Let's get it done and give preference, like you have said, Senator Webby, to the Jamaicans. Our manufacturing, our construction sector is being decimated because of the preference to those who do not uphold the laws of Jamaica. Minister, while you're on one of your trips, there's some problems on Mandela. And a Jamaican worker said on radio, in Jamaica, we are nobody. That's what the work on that site for which a foreign agency won the contract, said, in Jamaica, we are nobody. And that should send collective chills up our collective spines. When the Jamaican people are saying, in this country of ours, in 2018, I am nobody. We can dismiss him, but I take him seriously. When people feel that in our country, I am nobody, because those who have won the procurement bids, because they are cheaper, have gotten preference over the Jamaican construction industry, have no regard for the rates of pay, the safety condition of our workers, so that a worker can say, I am nobody in my own country. I feel that. And I know, Minister, the patriotic family that you have come out of, you must also feel it. When in our country, our worker can say, I'm nobody. We have to create what Nettleford calls the smaddification of our people. We have to make our people smaddy too. And the procurement rules must lead in that direction. We're going to security guards who are breaching the rules of the National Housing Trust, security guard companies, breaching the rules of the National Housing Trust, not paying the proper statutory deduction, but government is giving them the contracts. Procurement rules must protect the rights of our workers. It must protect our state. I don't find that happening under the current rules. And I'm not sure, Mr. President, that the amendments advance that. Mr. President, I want to ask some questions. Will the amendments in this rule, this act, change in a way the procurement of used cars for the police so that it never happen again where we spend $200 million of taxpayers' money and we can't get the cars in accordance with the contract? Will this change it? And say to Samuda, I welcome you to be as partisan as you may wish to be. This is about Jamaica. And I want to commend Minister Chang for boldly taking the decision to change this used car policy, that procurement that has gone bad, that debacle, and to go back to a system that worked in the past and will work for Jamaica in the future. I commend Minister Chang for his boldness, sitting beside his cabinet colleague who took us on that reckless path and say, I am changing it. Jamaica needs better than second-hand used car for our police. Will this policy change that? And Mr. President, I ask even more so, will this policy change what we're hearing in the Parliament as happening in a government agency that is duty-bound to uphold the procurement legislation? I speak, Mr. President, of a bill of quantity signed on the 8th of November, 2016, signed by a representative of the National Works Agency, signed by a representative of China Harbour Engineering Company, check. That bill of quantity outlined in detail how much steel, how much fence, excavation, backfill, expansion joints, and contingency, plus overheads and profit for the contractor. That bill of quantity, signed off by the senior official in the National Works Agency, as I said, on the 8th of November 2016, amounted to $29.7 million. efficiency would require us sticking close to that. But it has now been revealed that the work done on that fence amounted to $96 million. More than 3 times. More than 3 times the BQ, the bill of quantity, signed off by that senior representative at the National Works Agency and China Construction Engineering Company. The 2 agencies that was working on the road at Marcus Garvey and therefore understood what was to be done on the fencing. From 29.7 million to 96 million, and Minister, that has to be approved by the Cabinet. What role did the Cabinet play in that? Because that's amount above the amount that must be signed off on the Cabinet. Did the Cabinet sign off on this? Did the Honourable Andrew Michael Onis know about this? And if he didn't, then it would be a breach of the procurement rules. If he did, the question is, what did Mr. Onis, Andrew Michael Onis, did as Prime Minister to protect the taxpayers from 29.7 million to 96 million? That's a scandal. That's a scandal, Mr. President, and the country needs answer to that. And let me tell you clearly, Mr. President, this as a member of Parliament call it mumbo-jumbo explanation, that what happened was they extended the amount of fencing. Nonsense. We have the information. That's not so. Don't tell me about backfilling, more backfilling that was needed. That's mumbo-jumbo. Something is wrong with our procurement system that this bill can't cure. Exactly. This bill cannot cure. Should not. Greed, corruption, scandal. That's what it is. Mr. President, let's take another issue that requires procurement. Manchester, I want you to deal with that. I want you to deal with that. I'm not in the partisan thing, you know. When it comes to partisanship, you are making me look like an angel. When it comes to partisanship, Senator Matthew Shamuda, you are making me look like an angel, and I thank you. Mr. President, let us be clear. Let us be clear. Part of this bill speaks to services. But that's what you were doing when you spoke. Mr. President, this bill speaks to services. This country needs to know. This country needs to know that under our procurement rules, it has allowed a managing director to employ a consultant from abroad, for which the parent company, PBCJ, had the requisite technical and financial support and capabilities. Mr. President, it has come to my attention as a senator that an invoice, pro forma invoice, was paid by Petrojam in the amount of $17,000 US for work done. No, not a month. Anybody who says it's a month, not telling the truth. I'm repeating.